Welcome to the ANEW Body Insight podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogrammed Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. And Chantal Donnelly, physical therapist and author of Settled, How to Find Calm in a Stress-Inducing World. We follow our guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome to the ANEW Body Insight podcast. I am Dr. Supatra Tovar, and sadly we do not have Chantal Donnelly with us today, but she's here in spirit. I am so thrilled and honored to have author, life fulfillment expert, and clinical psychologist Dr. Carla Marie Manly with us today. Dr. Carla, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, totally. We are podcast swapping. I was just on Dr. Carla's and Dr. Carla's on mine. And we are just spreading the love and joy of helping people. That is our purpose today and every day. So I'm going to read a little bit about Dr. Carla, and then I'm going to get right into my questions for her. Dr. Carla Marie Manly, clinical psychologist, relationship expert, and author, is based in Sonoma County, California. In addition to her clinical practice focusing on relationships and personal transformation, Dr. Manly is deeply invested in her roles as podcaster, speaker, and consultant. With a refreshingly direct and honest approach, plus a dose of humor, and I might add a lot of kindness, Dr. Manly enjoys supporting others in the ever-evolving journey of life. Her novel self-development paradigm builds resilience, emotional intelligence, and self-esteem. Highlighting the importance of loving connection, her work also focuses on helping others create deeply connected and satisfying intimate relationships. Working from a transformative model that honors the body-mind-spirit connection, Dr. Manly offers holistic relationship and wellness seminars around the world. An award-winning author, Dr. Manly's books, The Joy of Imperfect Love, Date Smart, Joy from Fear, and Aging Joyfully highlight her empowering approach and profound expertise. Host of the captivating podcast, which I was just on, Imperfect Love, Dr. Manly offers uplifting guidance on navigating the messy road of life. Her expertise is also regularly cited in media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Forbes, Oprah, Newsweek, NBC, HuffPost, Reader's Digest, Psychology Today, Parade, GQ, Women's Health, Architectural Digest, Men's Health, and more. As if there could be more. This is incredible. Dr. Carla, I'm so honored to have you on today.
I'm so blessed to be here, Dr. Supatra. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So it was a really hard decision for me to figure out what I wanted to focus on in each part of this episode. So I chose two. We're going to start with relationships. I feel like that's an area we haven't really deeply covered in the podcast yet, and you are the person to get this information from. So I want to know, in your book, Date Smart, you emphasize the importance of self-awareness in building strong relationships. So what are the key steps that someone can take to become more self-aware in their romantic relationships?
Thank you. It's a superb foundational question. And what I have seen over time is that many people get into relationships without being very intentional. They fall in love. They get into a dating app. They select somebody. They are selected by somebody. All of these ways where it's less passive, less intentional, then we might even think about when we're preparing a meal. We're preparing a meal, a Thanksgiving spread, Christmas party. We have our lists. We're figuring out exactly what we want, who we want to come, what the qualities are of the food, what we want for the decorations. We put in a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
But when we go into the dating realm and the romantic relationship realm, particularly if we weren't coached as children or if we didn't have healthy role models as caregivers, we may just fall into patterns without thinking about them. And I have really learned over time that one of the biggest keys to healthy romantic relationships, whether you're in one, whether you're out of one, whether you're taking a long hiatus or a short hiatus, is to really start diving into who you are as a human being, increasing that self-awareness, growing that self-awareness in a really non-judgmental way, just stepping back from yourself as objectively as you can. Sometimes it's hard, so we often need a psychotherapist or a coach or a mentor or a really patient best friend who is wise to notice what our patterns have been from childhood forward, those that work for us. Yes, lean into those that work against us. Okay, let's learn from those and really start developing this amazing person that you are. Can this happen at the same time you're in a relationship? Some people think, oh, I need to leave my relationship in order to grow myself. Not necessarily. If you're in a really unhealthy relationship where the dynamics are very, very difficult, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, anything like that, it will be incredibly hard to work on yourself when you're in that relationship because it often takes so much effort just to stay afloat, just to get through one day in a really challenging relationship. But if you're in an even moderately healthy relationship, you can surely work on yourself. And if your partner is interested in doing some self-work, that power of two to continually work and use ruptures to gain insight into the self, into the other, into the relationship. So I really think, just taking it back to the beginning, whether we are single or in partnership, the more we work on the self to increase self-awareness, to go out into the world, knowing who we are and saying, this is what I have to offer. And being honest with yourself. And I'm talking about the things we have to offer on a very pragmatic, superficial level, but also the internal things. This is what I have to offer. I have, for example, I might have a strong work ethic. I might have, a desire to have kids. I might have a desire to be partnered. I might have a desire just to be in hookup relationships. Whatever it is that you have to offer, know what it is. And then step two is to know what you want in return.
Yes. This is huge. I just wanted, before we get into that, I want to just piggyback on that. I have a lot of couples clients. I have a lot of clients that are in relationship, and I can attest that really developing their selves as a full human being, really honoring who they are, makes them show up better in relationships. And yes, absolutely, if their partner is also in therapy, and they might even be doing some couples therapy together, I have seen so many older toxic kinds of relationship patterns resolve themselves. Maybe they're picking up what they got from their parents and bringing it into this relationship, and the other partner's doing the same. And they're bringing in all of these old attachment style difficulties. When they can resolve them in themselves, they can flourish. So I absolutely agree that self-awareness is huge. So now tell us how you then kind of manifest the perfect partner or draw the perfect person into your life.
You used a word twice that I really hone in on, or I like to hone actually that word and home in on it. But when we hone the idea of perfection, and we see that when we are looking for that perfect partner, that perfect lover, that perfect friend, that perfect child, that perfect whatever, we're already setting ourselves up for disappointment. Why?
Totally.
There is no such thing as perfect. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we set our sights on the perfect guys who is this tall, this, weight, makes this much money, is going to have these perfect habits, we aren't seeing a human being. We're seeing maybe an image that we saw in childhood of Prince Charming or somebody we saw in a magazine. But real people, we all have imperfections.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important for us to really look at how imperfect we are, embrace our strengths, make them stronger, know our weaknesses, know our frailties. If they can be grown and strengthened in positive ways, let's do that. But if there are areas where, for example, I often use this, somebody's really good at math, somebody's really good at English. We may not be able to become Einstein, in the world of mathematics and physics and all of that. So
Certainly me, I can't hardly add.
exactly. I'm with you on that. But we can get to a point where we can, be proficient at it. And so I take that idea and tell people, you might not ever be an Einstein at something, and that's okay. Just know that area, whether it's financial management or sports or whatever it is, you can work at it, but you may not become really excellent at it. And that's okay. And in fact, it's interesting. I was working with a client earlier who was talking about wanting the daughter to be more optimistic, less negative, more upbeat. And some of that's a natural set point. Some of the research shows us that our level of optimism is about 50% of it is natural set point. So if you're thinking in your head, I want this perfect partner who's always going to be 100% optimistic, well, that person, you may love them in all other realms, but they may have a slightly more pessimistic outlook, and they might have to really work toward being appreciative and all of that and being more optimistic. So we want to know that the idea of perfection, one of the most difficult aspects of it is that it makes us think that relationships don't take work and that self-development doesn't take work because we are
that's
all, yes. So that's a big piece of why I think that sometimes we set ourselves up when we say, I'm going to find that perfect someone, that perfect soulmate. I believe in soulmates, but I also believe that sometimes the soulmate is the one who makes us work the hardest.
Right. Or challenges us or helps us grow. I think that that's kind of true for anyone that comes into our lives. We don't realize, even if it's a difficult relationship, we don't realize that we're actually learning something and growing and getting something, even from the most negative interactions. So I think that's so important that we tend to look at our connections with more of an open gaze and more of an open heart in terms of what we can learn, rather than building up, resentments if things don't work out for us, if we have a conflict for someone. I think it's so important to look for the lesson in that. Now, you also talk about creating really deeply connected relationships. What kind of advice do you have for couples to learn how to do that? What does that actually mean, creating these deeply connected relationships?
It's actually my fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, I talk a lot about how friendships are actually at the root of every healthy long-term relationship, whether it's a friendship with a bestie, a kid, a partner, a romantic partner, whomever it might be. The friendship is the most important foundation, because when we have a strong foundation, we aren't operating in that very tempting superficial realm where conversations always stay, we're talking about, the latest car, the latest purse, or the latest sports, or the latest outfit, or what we did at work. Those are all great conversations. But one of the most common things I hear from people most common complaints is my partner doesn't see me. My
Mm-hmm.
partner is not curious about me. I
Yes.
feel like a ghost in the relationship. I feel like we're roommates. I feel like we're ships passing in the night. All of these, and what is that coming from? It's
Mm-hmm.
coming from a lack of that deep friendship. And friendship, one of the key pieces of it, is that we really spend time to cultivate the relationship, to show
Mm-hmm.
up, to be curious, to be present. And I even hear this from couples. They'll say, well, we've been married for 10 years or 30 years or whatever it is. I already know everything there is to know about my wife or my husband. And I think, oh my goodness, how is
Mm-mm.
that possible? Because in truth, we are all changing every day. I've experienced things today that my husband won't hear about or know about until he comes, until I see him tonight. And I won't know things about him. And so we are evolving differently today. He is experiencing things. And so it is that part of when we come back together, whether for evenings or weekends or whatever it is, it's one of the most beautiful things about friendships. We can see a friend, maybe once a month, and we get that coffee time and we're catching up and we're
Mm-hmm.
going deep. We're sharing things that happen to us. Yes, we can share some superficial things, but notice that those really deep connections are the ones where we're able to talk about, yes, the superficial things, those are lovely, but also going down into things that are scaring us or
Mm-hmm.
challenging us, our hopes, our dreams. And in that space of that deep connection, that is where trust and safety and, of course, vulnerability, all of these beautiful, essential needs are met and fed. And so that's what I really think most people, they want to be seen. They want to be
Totally.
listened to.
Well, how does somebody, if they really want and crave this deep connection, but their partner is a little bit more kind of in the checked out state, going on autopilot, what do you suggest for somebody to help bring about this deep connection?
It's such a great question. One of the things I actually learned from a therapist that I have recommended so many times is when you first come home from work, first time you see each other, pause, whatever you're doing. Person who comes in the door finds the other person if the other person doesn't know they're there, and pause, heart to heart.
Mm.
Feel each other's heart, deep breath in, deep breath out, and a very clear separate and a very clear look in your eyes. I love you.
Wow.
Thank you for being in my life. And
Mm.
that sets the stage for that reconnection, that basic. And I had actually learned just the heart to heart hug. And then I developed it over the years to say, wait a second, we want to add on this gaze, that eye
Mhm.
gaze of that deep seeing each other. So I think that tends to set the stage because often couples come home from work or the one who's tending to the kids, if kids are around or whatever, and they're in their own worlds. Their heads are still spinning from
Totally.
this and that and to-do lists. And so we
Mhm.
hop right into the to-do list or the busyness, and we forget that to see, to reconnect with this sacred being in front of us. And so I think that's one of the most important things that actually works with, especially with kiddos too, right? You want to give them a
Mhm.
big, no matter their age, you want to see them and let them know, you're important. I see you. The other piece is some couples will say to me, I don't even know where to start. I'm sick of asking him about his day. He's sick about asking me about my work day. I want to leave work behind me. So what can you do? You can purchase if you need them. There are many out there, conversation starter cards
Mhm.
specifically for couples where you
Yes.
can, and they're amazing. And I had told you about the ones I finally came out
I
with them. They're
know.
called,
Talk about those.
well, they're imperfect love cards, and they're a way for individuals and couples to just in really simple little bursts, 45 cards, their directions. You pull a card and it will help you look at some aspect of yourself in a very gentle way, help you ask your partner about it in a very gentle way. They can ask you. You can take it, and it was fun. I did one with friends the other day, and they said, oh my goodness, we could probably get through a few of them. And we had an hour together, and I said, oh, let's give it a shot. We picked one and
Oh,
spent the
wow.
entire hour dismantling just this one piece from three, because there were three of us from three different perspectives. So you can do that with something like conversation cards or my imperfect love cards. You can do it with a newspaper article. You can pick
Wonderful.
something from the newspaper, and it could be looking at your horoscope and talking
Mm,
about what the horoscope meant to you, what it didn't, how you find it funny, how you find it appropriate. If you really pause to look at the person and make the time, because again, we're often on autopilot. We want to get to cooking. We
yes.
want to get back to our phones. We want to get to the news. And a really funny thing is my husband tends to always be rushing
Mm,
to do the next project. And I say to him often, I say, honey, what you rushing for? Why are you doing
mm,
that? Let's just be. And he'll look at me and he'll settle down for maybe 5 or 10 minutes just to be. But when we make it fun, like, hey, partner, I want to invite you. And
mm-hmm.
often I have found with couples that one or both partners are afraid of connection. You had mentioned attachment earlier,
Yes.
and I work from an attachment paradigm often. And my last book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, is from an attachment paradigm. We often don't realize that if we have a partner who has one of the insecure attachment styles,
Mm-hmm.
asking questions, having deep
Mm-hmm.
conversations may be
Yes.
actually quite scary to them. They might not be able to admit it. They might not
Yes.
realize it. But I know quite a few people where they were quizzed by their parents or put in the hot seat by parents or former romantic partners, where the idea of having somebody ask questions like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble.
Yes.
And it can come from a very, very old part of the self, or rather very young part of the self that is afraid. So as we learn to have conversations that are gentle,
Mm-hmm.
but taking them deep and asking questions like, well, what are your thoughts on that? What would
Mm-hmm.
you do with that? And when the other
Mm-hmm.
person realizes we won't judge them, that we're just
Yes.
trying to learn, we create that that lovely connection. And it takes time. As you know, there are some times when if a partner is highly defended or always on
Mm-hmm.
some busy track, and especially if there are kids and lots of life responsibilities, it can seem like, why do I want to do this? I just want to go and sleep right now.
Yes. Yes. I love that you encourage to make the connection time fun. With my husband, we created what we call wuddling. And that's when we come together right before we get ready for bed and we do Wordle puzzles like phrase and
Mm.
Wordle, and we do them together. And that then turns into a cuddle session. And we do that every single night together. Even if I'm traveling, we will do wuddling via like Zoom or whatever the method is. And it really has increased our intimacy levels, just our ability to just, have these wonderful conversations based out of, something fun. So I love that you do that and encourage that with your clients. I think that's so important. But what about, and I have a few, I think most couples, when they go to therapy, they're in certain conflict states. When it comes to conflict resolution, I think the communication tends to kind of go out the window. What are some strategies that you suggest for people when they're in this high conflict state, emotions are running high? How can they resolve that peacefully?
Great question. And one of my first techniques for that, even though it might seem obvious, take a time out.
Mm-hmm.
And a time out just has a few basic agreements And I really love making agreements explicit rather than
Yes.
assuming somebody knows. And so I think one of the first things, because when our patterns are old and hardwired in, they get in control of us very quickly. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the only ways to become the master over the habit, instead of the habit having mastery over you, is to simply say to your partner, I need a timeout. This is where I'm going. This is when I'll return. And so that might sound like this. I'm feeling really stressed right now. I'm getting pretty anxious about our discussion. I'm going to take a walk around the block. I'll be gone for about 15 minutes. When I get back, I'll check in with you. And if you and I are both in a better space, we can try again. It
Mm-hmm.
can also be of longer duration. It can be
Mm-hmm.
something like, hey, I'm feeling really upset right now. I can feel that I'm not going to be able to use my words properly and that my, anger is really coming up strong. I'm going to go take a drive. I'll be gone for probably 2 hours. I'm going to go to the gardening store, have a walk around, maybe get a plant or two. I'll have my phone with me. And I'll be back in about 2 hours, and I'm going to use the time to do some thinking. And I hope, it's a positive interlude for you as well. And what we've
Mm.
done by that, we've taken care of the self. We've checked our anger or frustration, whatever. We've given ourselves whatever time we think we need to recalibrate. We've modeled for the other person that we're safe, that we're going to stay contained. If they're very anxious, they know where we're going. So we're likely not too badly triggering any fear of rejection or fear of, disappearing on them. I know, it makes the abandonment issues not get quite so hot. And
Yes.
then it allows them to know I am circling back to reconnect, and this is when. So it
Yes.
creates the safety. And then if you
Mm.
come back, often what I've seen with partners, once they get used to it, when both people get used to it and use that time apart for a little reflection,
Mm-hmm.
if as they learn to get out of the blame and shame game, often by the time they return, a bit of the problem has resolved itself.
Agreed.
Yes, and then they're able to sometimes some, partners will tell me, "Oh, I took a time out and, I went for a run." And as I was running, I could hear that all my wife was asking me to listen to her. I had made it into a big deal and da 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 da. And when I came home, I was like, "Hey, hon, I'm so sorry. I used the
Mm-hmm.
time to reflect. I realized I wasn't listening to you. What do you want to
Yes.
say?"
Oh, I
So,
love it.
yeah, often that timeout, because we're used to timeouts for kids, but we aren't used to taking them as adults. And
Well,
that's
I
where,
would say that, like, probably the most common attachment style couples, and you probably will agree, are the avoidant and the anxious attachment styles.
yes.
The ones that are avoidant tend to be the ones who might cut off a conversation and walk out the door and leave the one who's anxious without that time frame,
Mhm.
without knowing when that person's going to get back. And that is so anxiety producing. I think that is I do this with my couple clients too. I think it is so important when it, you know, becomes heated, that we take that time, that we, allow each other the moment to just regulate ourselves and come back and be able to talk from a loving place. It's also, encouraged in things like nonviolent communication. And I think it's
Yes.
so valuable. And I think so many conflicts are resolved just by that communication, the explicit, I will be here, I will be gone this long, I am coming back. Don't worry. The other person gets a chance to regulate their nervous system. They get the chance. And when they come back, usually the conflict tends to, resolve itself, or at least be more easily resolved. So let's talk about boundaries, because I think
Okay.
boundaries are really, really important in healthy relationships. But I think so many people struggle with creating them. What kind of, advice do you give on creating boundaries within a relationship?
I think boundaries are such a critical part because they tell us what our needs are. When we
Mm-hmm.
have boundaries, we have taken the time to say, this is what's important to me. This
Mm.
is, who can come in through this particular gate. This person needs a key. This person doesn't, whatever it might be, because our
Right.
boundaries are different for different situations.
Mm.
And I think in our romantic relationships, boundaries really set us up for success because they create more respect for the self, more respect for the partner, and more
Mhm.
respect for the relationship. And I also think that boundaries tend to cut down on game playing, which,
Yes.
yes, often if there's a dysfunctional relationship, when when at least one partner starts growing the boundaries, there's not as much opportunity for the manipulation, because as that person gets stronger and gets boundaries
Mhm.
and learns, to have and hold these healthy boundaries, then they feel better. And it's this nice, like, picket fence. It's not a brick wall, but they're saying,
Mm-mm.
hey, this is what I need. And so I
Mhm.
think it's so helpful in relationships because it does create a sense of also knowing what the other person's expectations are and what their needs are. It takes away the second guessing.
Absolutely. So, what would you suggest to somebody if they, say are in a relationship where a partner might be speaking to them in a way that they don't appreciate? How would they set a boundary?
I love using iMessages. And for
Me too.
listeners who aren't, familiar with iMessages, an iMessage is simply, instead of saying, you are an idiot, you hurt my feelings, you never do things right, that sort of thing, which many people were raised with that kind of language. So if
Hmm.
it does sound familiar, what you'd want to start shifting to is I, followed by a feeling statement. I feel sad. I feel hurt. And then you can even add on not only why you feel sad and hurt, but what the cure would be.
Hmm.
So it could sound something like, I feel hurt when you don't call me when you're running late because I work really hard to make a beautiful dinner, and then I have to reheat it, and I feel disrespected when that happens.
Mm.
In the future, I would appreciate it if you're going to be more than, 5 or 10 minutes late, just shoot me a text that says,
Mm.
"Hey, I'll be home a bit late. It'll be like 15 minutes." I would feel so much more respected if you did that. So what you've done is you've had nice boundaries, you've stated your needs, you've stated how you feel, and you've given your partner very clear directions on what they could do to honor that boundary.
I love it. I think I statements are everything because it lowers defense. It helps the partners see their partner from a more human and loving standpoint. And when we love our partner, we don't want to see them feel disrespected. We don't want to see them having these difficult emotions. And I think replacing the finger pointing with more of a, hand on the heart and saying, this is, an area that's hard for me. If you could please just be conscious of that. Of course, they're going to want to give that to you. Dr. Carla, I cannot believe, but we're out of time for this half of this episode. We could go on and on and on and talk about relationships together. And I have to say, I can't even imagine you having conflict in your relationships because you are just the kindest, most gentle person. So I feel like I'm learning from a guru, but we're going to take a little bit of a break and we're going to come back for the next half of this episode, and we're going to switch gears because we're going to now talk about joyful aging. So thank you for joining us for this half, Dr. Carla.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Supatra.
Yes. And thank you for joining us. Tune in next week for the second half of this wonderful interview with author, life fulfillment expert, and clinical psychologist, Dr. Carla Marie Manly. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Body Insight podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Body Insight podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.